When Fallout 4 was launched in November 2015, the hardest difficulty in the game was Survival Mode. This Survival Mode wasn't actually anything different, it was just an extension of the difficulties below it. It didn't add anything new. But in March 2016, Bethesda released an update that renamed the old Survival Mode to Very Hard Mode, and they added a whole bunch of new stuff to Survival Mode that, in my opinion, genuinely transforms the game into something else altogether. Into something better than the original. In this video, I'm going to talk about why Survival Mode is so good and why it's such a transformative experience compared to the standard base game, and why I think everybody should play it. But to start with, let's talk about what changing the difficulty in Fallout 4 actually does normally. Ultimately, changing the difficulty only actually changes three things: how much damage the enemies do to you, how much damage you do to the enemies, and the rate at which legendary enemies spawn. Now, I also thought that experience was affected by difficulty level. I thought you got more experience if you were on a higher difficulty, but apparently that's not true. So, on the easiest difficulty, enemies do a quarter of the damage while you do twice as much damage, but you only get a quarter of the legendary spawn rate. On the hardest difficulty, which is now Very Hard Mode of course, you get twice the legendary enemies, but you deal half damage while enemies deal twice as much damage. So in the new, overhauled Survival Mode, you might expect this trend to continue, but it doesn't. Instead, you actually deal more damage compared to Very Hard Mode. The problem is, enemies also deal more damage compared to Very Hard Mode. Basically, everybody in the game is squishier, including yourself, but they're also more dangerous. In a way, this is actually more realistic than the base game's Very Hard Mode, where certain enemies could get extremely tanky in the late game. In Survival Mode, enemies are way less tanky on the whole, but so are you. A small mistake could be completely fatal. That being said, you also get 3 times the legendary enemies compared to normal mode, which is a blessing on the one hand, but a curse on the other, because legendary enemies are so much tougher than normal ones. But that's not all that Survival Mode does. In fact, it adds a surprisingly large number of tweaks to the gameplay that make it simultaneously very challenging compared to the base game, but also much more interesting and in-depth. To me, there are 4 major changes that Survival Mode makes apart from the combat tweaks that defines the character of this game mode and makes it so amazing. Let's talk about them, shall we? To start with, the most obvious change is the addition of survival meters. Now, it's worth mentioning that Fallout has experimented with this before, mostly with the addition of Fallout New Vegas' Hardcore mode, which is very similar to Survival Mode. In Hardcore mode, the courier has 3 survival meters that constantly deplete and need to be topped up, which are thirst, hunger, and tiredness. Standard survival mechanics there. Failing to drink, eat, or sleep will lead to debuffs on your character as certain thresholds are passed, mostly reductions to your special, followed by instant death at the very end. In my opinion though, this hardcore mode is not that difficult. There is literally endless fresh water all over the map. There's a source of fresh water right at the beginning of the game. Lake Mead is entirely clean, drinkable water with no debuffs. There are countless civilized areas all over the map with beds and food for sale, and the debuffs for neglecting these meters are not actually that bad. At the very worst, you lose 22 special points in a game that gives you 35 special points to build your character with, and there are literally no other effects for being inches from death. Fallout 4, on the other hand, is much harsher with the same survival meters that it adds. Fallout 4's meters deplete in discrete stages rather than being a continuous value that you can observe at any time. I mean, functionally it doesn't make any difference because Fallout New Vegas only imposed the debuffs at discrete stages, but the difference is in Fallout 4 you can't see how far down a certain stage you are. But the other thing is that the punishments for failing to eat, drink, or sleep in Fallout 4 Survival Mode are way more severe than they are in Fallout New Vegas. At the highest value of all of these meters at the same time, you suffer a total of 51 special points being lost, which isn't actually possible to have until level 23. So basically, if you're maxed out on hunger, thirst, and sleep at the same time, you're taking periodic damage to start with, you're losing AP, removing it from the bar just like rad damage does to health, which is a fantastic way of measuring fatigue, and you're also going to be basically on 0 special across the board. And being tired prevents you from running, even if you're not over-encumbered. To make matters worse, there's a significant risk involved with satisfying these meters in less than ideal ways, basically. In effect, you have to eat cooked food, you have to drink clean, purified water, and you have to sleep in covered beds that are raised up off the ground instead of mattresses or sleeping bags. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting a disease. So diseases are basically debuffs that work in various ways. They mess you up in various ways, basically like diseases in real life. They include parasites, which mean you have to eat more. Weakness means you take more damage. Infection deals you periodic damage, so on and so forth. Diseases suck, basically. Now, these diseases are given to you as a result of checks, which are basically dice rolls made after a high-risk event, such as swimming in dirty water, eating uncooked food, sleeping on the floor or in the rain, or drinking radioactive water. These things also increase the risk pool of getting the disease, which means you're more likely to get a disease whenever the check is performed. This pool is reset after you sleep or after you get a disease. Diseases last between 3 and 7 in-game days, but you absolutely can have more than one disease at a time if it takes too long to go away. One of the ways you get rid of diseases is by going to a doctor, but if you're out and about and there's no doctors to be found, you'll have to use antibiotics, which are a new item added to survival mode. But now, here's where things get interesting. Here's where the synergy comes in. Antibiotics, although being extremely useful, increase your thirst meter. In fact, all chems negatively affect your survival meters in some way or another, including stim packs, which, by the way, are now much slower than they are in the base game. Generally, this means that chems have a much more immediate negative impact on your health than in the base game. In the base game, the only real downside to chems is addiction, but now, Radaway, for example, reduces your immune system, which makes you more susceptible to disease, and it makes you hungry. This of course works in tandem with the survival meters, so if you only have bad food available and you're irradiated, you have to weigh up the cost of Radaway against the benefits. You have to weigh up the cost of getting hungry and lowering your immune system against getting rid of the rads from your health bar. That sort of synergy is genius, and it makes survival mode genuinely very challenging because everything affects everything else. That's what makes it so immersive and interesting. It's not just a bunch of balls to keep in the air. You have to consider which balls are going to knock other ones out of your hands, for example. Basically, everything is working together to make a more realistic and challenging experience. The next change that the game makes is a deceptively simple one. It just disables fast travel. So in a lot of games this would just be annoying and tedious, and trust me, that definitely is the case in Fallout 4, especially when travelling to and from DLCs, but Fallout 4's map is actually quite small and extremely dense, and the fast travel in the base game is extraordinarily generous, so it ends up working quite well, actually. Instead of just fast travelling to the location closest to your quest marker, you end up having to plan your journeys carefully. You have to plot a safe route to various known settlements along the way. You have to take enough food and water with you. You have to find out where beds are along the route so that you can sleep and reset your meters and your disease pool on the way. You end up having to visit settlements that exist full of NPCs to help you, to heal you up, or to get a bed to sleep in, or to buy some more food or water. With the survival meters and the difficulty increase, the journeys that you take end up becoming the new gameplay loop, with each ending and beginning at a safe settlement, which is more realistic to how it would be in a post-apocalyptic world. Removing fast travel also recontextualizes a few mechanics that in the base game are kind of useless. So, to start with, there's settlements, right? Building up a settlement in the base game with lots of amenities and protection is useful, but doing more than 2 is basically pointless because you can always fast travel back home from wherever you are, refill everything, and then go out again. So most people playing the game will probably build up Sanctuary, or they'll build up another one in a convenient location and they'll just make it their base. I've definitely done this a lot. Tavernton Boathouse is one of my favourites, by the way. In the base game, you end up building up one settlement as your home base, and then you just neglect all the others because what's the point in having more than one base? In survival mode though, it becomes way more useful to have a huge interconnected network of settlements permeating the Commonwealth that you can use as checkpoints and rest stops on your long journey, places to refill water and food, places to sleep off any diseases you might have picked up along the way, places to heal from any damage you've taken. Journeys in survival mode almost never happen as you plan them, so having a lot of settlements around the wasteland kind of acts like a big safety net, which, as it turns out, is exactly what Preston Garvey and the Minutemen are always going on about. It just so happens that survival mode increases the ludonarrative harmony of the Minutemen questline. Ludonarrative harmony is basically how well the gameplay matches up with the story that you're being told. Preston Garvey tells you that it's a good idea to build lots of settlements and make the Commonwealth safer. In the base game, that doesn't really have much of an impact, but in survival mode, it does, and building up lots of settlements makes your journeying across the wasteland safer and more easy. So basically Preston's words and his actions have meaning and weight in the real game. Another mechanic that survival mode makes more useful is transport. Now, a few different factions offer you transport alternatives around the wasteland. For example, the Brotherhood gives you vertibird signal grenades, which can be used to summon a vertibird that takes you to a specific, pre-discovered location. In the base game, this is not only slower than fast travelling, but it's also more dangerous, especially because the vertibird itself isn't indestructible, and it does draw a lot of attention from enemies on the ground. It's basically pointless. However, in survival mode, it actually becomes a pretty good alternative to walking over a huge, dangerous distance. At least in the vertibird, you have a minigun speed on your side. Generally, trying to cross areas like the glowing sea end up being much safer in a vertibird than they do on foot, and it's especially useful for going to and from DLC entry sites because it just takes away a lot of walking, basically. The Institute teleporter is probably even more useful in survival mode than the vertibirds are. In the base game, the teleporter is basically just a fast travel. The only difference is that it works in survival mode as well. You can basically teleport to the Institute from anywhere. It ends up being a teleporter that can take you from anywhere to safety immediately. Now in survival mode, that is extremely valuable because it means that you can get out of any terrible situation. Again, visiting the glowing sea, as soon as you're out of combat, just fast travel straight back to the Institute and you've got somewhere to sleep, you've got somewhere to get more food and water and cure diseases. It's insanely useful. The other interesting thing is that the player now has a moral conundrum. 3/4 of all the factions in the game want you to destroy the Institute. And you're supposed to have this sort of emotional connection to the Institute because of your son, but that's not very strong generally. Having the teleporter actually is a much more convincing reason to stick with the Institute throughout the entire game. If you want to, quote, do the right thing for the Commonwealth, you have to give up this incredibly useful resource. Again, ludonarrative harmony has been enhanced by survival mode. One of the big reasons to stick with the Institute is that they're more technologically advanced, and the teleporter is actual proof of that in survival mode. In the base game, it's basically pointless, it doesn't have any extra impact, but in survival mode, it suddenly becomes a very important resource. Arguably the only faction that doesn't benefit from survival mode in terms of ludonarrative harmony is the Railroad. I do still think that the ludonarrative harmony of the Railroad is pretty good, but there's nothing specific about survival mode that makes them more worth siding in survival mode than in the base game. Another thing that makes survival mode good is the decrease in carry capacity and the addition of weight to previously weightless things like stimpaks and ammunition. So this is something that on the surface adds difficulty, yes, but it also emphasizes the importance of planning ahead. You know, how much ammunition am I going to need on this journey? How many stimpaks am I going to need? Don't forget that stimpaks and Radaway are now much slower than normal, and they make you thirsty and hungry. In the base game, healing is way too easy, because you can just spam stimpaks whenever you want. In survival mode, stimpaks are a useful and valuable resource that are useful, but they're not as useful as they used to be, and you should probably only use them in drastic situations if you've got spare water on you. Again, it also makes settlement doctors far more useful. You can now exchange caps for complete healing without getting thirsty, and you can cure radiation and addiction without again affecting your immune system or making you thirsty. You can also, of course, build doctors in your own settlements, so once again, settlements have become better and certain perks like local leader have become more worth taking. Having a lower carry capacity also means you have to make more difficult judgment calls on which junk items to take back to base, which weapons you want to bring with you, which mods best suit your play style. Because in the base game, normally you just max a gun out on damage without a second thought and carry it around with you, but in survival mode, lightness can actually be more useful than outright gun damage. I almost never use heavy guns in survival mode just because they're so ridiculously heavy, and because the ammunition like missiles and Fat Man launchers and mini nukes are just so heavy. In fact, it's sometimes even worth considering having two guns that do different things that use the same ammunition just so that you can save on some carry capacity. The final thing that completely changes the way survival mode feels compared to the base game is the fact that you can only manually save when you sleep. In the base game, Fallout 4 autosaves every other breath, and you can quick save by pushing F5 and you can save whenever you want, but in survival mode that doesn't happen. Autosaves are disabled, quick saves are disabled. Exit saves are made when you quit, but they're destroyed as soon as you load. The only permanent saves you can make are whenever you sleep. Now, on its own, this isn't actually too bad, but it synergizes very well with another addition in the game, Adrenaline. Adrenaline is a special perk you gain by killing enemies in survival mode. It gives you 5% extra damage for every 5 enemies you kill, up to 50% bonus damage across the board. Needless to say, this is extremely powerful. The problem is, of course, sleeping resets your adrenaline. I mean, technically it decays your adrenaline over time, so the longer you sleep, the lower it gets, but for most intents and purposes, a full 7 hours sleep will reset your adrenaline to 0, unless you've maxed it out. This means with every engagement you go into, you have to make a choice. Do I go in with high adrenaline and have a higher chance of getting out alive, or do I drop a quick save at a nearby bed and make myself weaker on purpose, but I've got a recent save, so if I die, it doesn't matter as much. In my opinion, this change is genius, and it represents the single biggest increase in difficulty and frustration sometimes in survival mode. Because you have the threat of losing 3 hours of progress at a time always looming over you, I find that most engagements become way more stressful, way more tense, and sometimes legitimately frightening. If someone brushes me with a bullet and takes off half my health, I'm far more likely to run away and heal for a few minutes in survival mode than I am in the base game. To me, this combined with every other difficulty increase that I've mentioned is what makes survival mode feel so different to the base game. You have to juggle all these different things all at once, and the whole time the threat of losing a huge amount of progress because you haven't had a save recently is terrifying. It looms over you. But once you've played survival mode for as long as I have, going back to the base game feels very different. It feels generous. It feels honestly too easy to me, even on the hardest difficulty. Honestly, I love that Bethesda took the risk to make survival mode really brutally difficult and to introduce all these interesting mechanics, because I think it works so much better with the narrative of the Fallout universe as a whole. This game tells you that the world is harsh and unforgiving, but then it lets you fast travel around as much as you want and carry around as many mini nukes as you like. In survival mode, you're actually forced to live and experience the world as the game tells you it is, brutal and harsh, which, to be honest, feels like a much more complete and immersive Fallout experience than almost any other game in the franchise is able to offer. Personally, I really hope that a similar addition to the game is made to Fallout 5, whenever the hell that game comes out. If it ever even does. Thanks for watching this video if you made it to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully everybody here wants a bit more Fallout content in the future. I've decided to try and gear my channel more towards Fallout than I have been doing so far. Largely because I think it's a good idea to try and tell my YouTube channel that it is a Fallout channel, ultimately. My most popular video on this channel is a Fallout video, and I really should have picked up on that and, run with it. Actually made some more Fallout videos, because I had a few ideas, but I never really got round to them. Obviously, if you like Fallout and you want to see more of it on the channel, then let me know in the comments. Let me know if you want me to play any of the games or do any more video essays on any particular topics. And yeah, be sure to subscribe if you want to see more generic gaming content and more Fallout content. Hopefully my channel will start to pick up a bit after about June time, which is when my exams are finished, and when I say finished, I mean finished forever. This is my last year of university. Also, just to note, I've started up a Patreon over on, patreon.com/ I think it's official Tibby, maybe. There's barely anything on it. All that there is for now is just early access to certain videos like this one. If you want to go and support me, it only costs £1 a month so far. Again, probably next year or something, I will add more stuff to the Patreon to make it a bit more worth your while. But that's all from me for now. Thank you everybody for watching again, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye!